People are endowed with reason in order to account for their own actions, plan and analyze their actions. Fantasy flies next to the mind with a subtle magical force, so that we can direct ourselves into the future, lift our spirit to the stars, and believe in our strength. We have everything in us to live happily, but from the birth of mankind, something went wrong. One hated the other, envied, desired his neighbor's wife, and people's minds were distorted. People have made themselves victims of the black forces that gazed with hungry black eyes at our planet. For them, life is not a flower of the universe and a miracle of creation. For them, someone else's life is a resource that must be used. How? Sometimes I don't want to know about it, not even 5% of the truth that I know. But I am aware. My heart is clutched by the claws of hatred for them, for the alien bastards who encroached on the most sacred thing, life and reason on our planet. But also my heart is tormented by pity for all those tortured in their inhuman experiments. I'm incognito. I'm not calling anyone to anything. I just want you to understand one truth. The world is not what it seems, and I'll tell you a secret.
30-year-old Emidio was walking heavily along a path leading through the foothills along a fast-flowing stream. He really wanted to stop, kneel down and quench his thirst with icy water from the stream. But he didn't do it. He didn't want to look like a weakling in his wife's eyes. And without that, she's been freaking out for the last 2 months. You need to lose weight, Emidio. You eat too much, Emidio. Oh, how heavy you are, Emidio. The man smiled to himself. His wife, the blonde, slender Ginevra, walked in front. Sporty, slightly short shorts hugged her curves seductively, which pleased Emidio's eyes. If you think about it, my wife was right in many ways, and now she seemed to feel his thoughts. She looked back and gave him a radiant smile. Trying to hide his shortness of breath, Emidio took a deep breath and exhaled. No, my angel, it's all good. It's just a little hot. In fact, he went on this trip for her sake. His Matriona couldn't sit still. She wanted impressions. To walk, wander, make some discoveries. Emidio was fine with all this, but when it didn't break through the boundaries of the bed. Right now, he wasn't exactly annoyed, but a little out of place. There was a sound from behind.
Come on, Emidio, push it up. We'll have a rest stop soon.
Here is another circumstance that irritates a married Italian. And this circumstance was called by a very definite male name. And this circumstance also had an appearance. It was Marco. In fact, a Frenchman who lives permanently in Paris but of Italian origin, or more precisely a classmate of Ginevra. Emidio looked around. I'm not tired at all. To which Marco, black-haired and as athletic as Ginevra, smiled, showing snow-white teeth.
Well, then we can go not only to the foot of the Dolomites, but in general through the entire tourist route. Belluno, Bolzano, Pordenone, Trento, and Udine.
He spoke the names of the Italian provinces in a funny way with a French accent. Emidio was about to say something harsh, but Ginevra beat him to it.
Marco, we should at least walk to the outskirts of Belluno today. To be honest, I am already tired myself. I think we could relax in that break-up.
Everyone stopped, looking where the young woman was pointing.
Over there, at the very bottom. There are such beautiful pines there. I would like to look around there.
The girl winked at her husband and took his hand. She knew how to do this. She knew how to make it clear to him that he decides, that he is in charge, and that his opinion is very important to her. Emidio looked at her lovingly and said reasonably, again trying to hide his shortness of breath, Yes, my love. I like this place too. I think we could stay there. He was the first to go to the foot where pine trees grew on a small shaded patch among the stones. Ginevra followed, and Marco, shaking his head condescendingly, at first remained standing in place, admiring Ginevra, but then decided to keep up. Emidio was terribly annoyed that Marco turned out to be the third in their campaign. My wife surprised me so much. 2 days ago, Emidio was standing in the kitchen in a white mohair dressing gown. Did not touch anyone. Did not think about great things, but just drank orange juice straight from the bottle. Suddenly, Ginevra ran into the kitchen. She was smiling, and her look expressed something like the following. Honey, don't be scared. I have wonderful and unexpected news. You better sit down. Emidio then did just that. He sat down on a chair. Ginevra, in a voice full of enthusiasm and cheerfulness, said,
Marco is flying in from Paris tomorrow. He invited us to hike in the Dolomites. Honey, this is what I have always dreamed of, hiking in the mountains.
The man had studied his wife's character well, so not a single muscle twitched on his face. On the contrary, he smiled. To the mountains? Honey, I think it might be dangerous. With this phrase, he walked along the edge. Ginevra's eyes began to darken from joyous in a split second. Her face and voice became serious, and her tone began to change from positive to pleading, proving.
Well, what could be dangerous there? Moreover, Marco will be with us because I told you, he is a climber and knows the mountains perfectly. Oh, honey, please.
The last please, pronounced so sweetly, while Ginevra pouted her lips just like a little girl begging for candy. How could he refuse? No way. Although he said to himself, practically shouted, "I protest!" The mountain loomed like a mighty block right behind him. There was not only monumental power in it, but also something primordial. No, even primordial, as a reminder of those times when the earth was still a red-hot ball. It reared up with fiery loud bursts of magma from giant volcanoes, gnashed tectonic strata weighing millions of tons, screamed and moaned in the throes of the birth of what we call it nature these days. The Dolomites were no exception. Many millions of years ago, in the blessed land of Italy, two plates crept over each other, bulged, and formed a chain of mountains and hills, ending in a multi-kilometer plateau bordered by the Isacco, Pusteria, Piave, Brenta, and Adige rivers. Centuries-old erosion by southern winds has sculpted bizarre patterns of ledges, dips, sharp and flat peaks, valleys, and caves. Yielding to the desire to participate in something great and powerful, Emidio touched the steep mountain wall with his palm and looked up. It seemed as if the mountain range was overhanging and falling. The water falling almost vertically down the slope created the illusion of moving stones. Mother Teresa and San Brigitte of Andalusia.
Is it impressive?
Marco suddenly turned from behind, which made Emidio turn around. Yes, it is inconceivable to the mind what kind of force was raging here. Ginevra was standing in a shallow depression that looked like a crater and unpacking backpacks her own and Emidio's. I was busy with business. Marco did not understand what kind of power Emidio was talking about and made a surprised face.
What are you talking about? These are not the highest mountains I've been to yet. Last year, a group of friends and I flew to Nepal, where strength is not only mountains but also knowledge. By the way, at that time we invited Ginevra with us and you, of course. But she refused.
Emidio openly looked into Marco's eyes and saw something vague, indefinite in them. Was he jealous? Yes, of course he was jealous. I didn't understand why this fop was here at all, although he was partly to blame. Ginevra needed attention, an impression, and he became a fat man too quickly. Yes, we had other plans. We planned and took a cruise on the Mediterranean Sea. Emidio walked away from the rock and went to his wife. Baby, do you need help? Ginevra smiled.
No, dear.
She spread the polypropylene mats out of the blue and pressed their edges in the center with a backpack, looked around everything.
It turned out to be such a good playground, and the shade from the rock. Darling, you and Marco could set up a tent and make a bonfire.
She turned to her former classmate.
If I'm not mistaken, then there will be only rocks and open valleys further on. Can we stay the night here? I think it's going to get dark soon.
Marco looked up at the sky, squinted.
It's still an hour to sunset, maybe an hour and a half. In principle, we could.
Emidio didn't let him finish. I also think it's better to stay here, and tomorrow with renewed vigor. Marco didn't give up.
Well, what are we going to do for an hour before sunset? They usually go on a hike for now. Marco smiled and recited. Until night finds tired travelers on the road, covering them with its black wings.
Ginevra laughed.
Very poetic, Marco. If I'm not mistaken, is this Cervantes's? There's just one thing I can't understand.
Both men looked at the girl. What? Ginevra laughed.
Why haven't you set up a tent and lit a fire yet?
Without thinking twice, Emidio took off the largest backpack from his shoulders. This was the tent, which folded comfortably for carrying over his shoulders. Marco went to make a fire, deciding first to choose small stones for the vegetable garden. Ginevra shook her head indignantly. She hoped the men would work together, but contrary to her expectations, everyone went about their business. Why did she go on this trip, especially since they had a handsome guy like Marco with them? She didn't want to anger or upset her husband. I didn't want him to suffer in any way or be depressed by the company of an outsider man. But over the years of family life, her husband bored her. Was there love? Was. There was also devotion, a sense of family, a close person, but there was also longing, boredom, routine. She wanted her husband to be jealous of her, shake himself up and start changing for the better. And she would help him, of course. The only thing that wasn't in her plans was that she saw and understood from Marco's eyes. She was interesting to him. He was staring at her, especially at her legs and hips. He wanted her. From this thought, Ginevra's thighs moistened, and she smiled absurdly, leaning back to the backpack. There were some products for the lung, a snack for the night. More experienced in everyday affairs, Emidio coped with the tent, pressing its edges with flat plates, and then watched Marco from the side. After a few minutes, Emidio began to grin, watching how the dry branches piled in a pile did not want to flare up. "Is it not working, Marco?" Ginevra was watching. Emidio felt that she was watching and repeated his question. "Marco, is it not working? Maybe you need help." The man did not answer anything, but just went to his backpack. There was a lighter fluid there. To be honest, Marco always used it to light bonfires, but this time I decided to try it in a simple way. While he was poking around in his backpack, Emidio went to the place where the bonfire was planned. In the blink of an eye, he folded the branches and lit them. Ginevra clapped her hands.
Burn, burn clearly.
Emidio smiled, seeing how perplexed Marco was looking at him, then at his wife, then at the bonfire. Experience is my friend, and service in the army. Marco did not want conflict, although he would not have avoided it.
Well, you are just a real hero, Don Emidio. I hope tomorrow you will show your skills when we climb the mountain plateau.
Sunset came much earlier, and in the mountains, a few minutes after sunset, it begins to get dark. After a quarter of an hour, it is already completely dark. The rocky area was lit by a bonfire. Ginevra was sitting on her husband's right hand, and Emidio was a little apart, skewering thick slices of ham on small, thin skewers. And still, you did well, Emidio, that you brought food with you. I mean, I've approached this issue more thoroughly. I'm hungry as a wolf. Emidio was sitting with his stomach slightly retracted, trying to look thinner. Don't mention it, Marco. I always approach your questions thoroughly. After all, I am a married man, and it is my sacred duty to feed my wife. Can you imagine what the cave cannibals would do in my place? Marco looked at Emidio questioningly. You don't know?
No.
Emidio laughed. A primitive man would grab any outsider, forget like a mammoth, and then have a barbecue. Marco didn't say anything, not appreciating the joke, and Ginevra listened.
Oh, stop talking nonsense. Thank God we don't live in primitive caves. You'd better look at the stars in the sky.
Emidio and Marco looked up at the sky. The sight was magnificent, breathtaking. The huge moon, on which craters were visible in distinct gray spots, poured snow-white light, but could not eclipse the Milky Way, imprinted with a cloudy, winding haze in the black sky. And from horizon to horizon, in an immense deep black dome, there are billions of stars with small white and blue lights. Emidio put his hand on his wife's shoulder, and she clung to him affectionately, leaning against his massive stomach.
There seems to be Altair.
The woman pointed to a bright star almost at the horizon.
And there, it seems, is a scorpion.
Emidio nodded. That's right, and if it were autumn now, you could see Pegasus and Cepheus, and it seems Orion. Marco was frying ham.
No, Orion seems to be a winter constellation, although it is probably above us now. The stars do not disappear according to the seasons. It's just that some are shining brighter, some are dimming. Probably primitive people not only ate each other, but also looked at the stars at night.
He winked at Ginevra, and then began to remove the ham from the skewer. He laid it on a slightly toasted toast and handed it to the girl. She took it and handed it to her husband. then waited for her own and took a bite.
Marco, that's great.
She looked up at the stars again, chewing on the meat.
I wonder if we're alone in the universe. Maybe some thinking beings are sitting in the mountains on their planet, roasting meat, or whatever they have, and wondering about which constellations are above them. They fall in love. They love each other.
Emilio gently squeezed his wife's shoulder with his palm. That's for sure. I wonder what they look like. Maybe they are the same as us? Marco threw dry twigs on the fire, sending up a shower of sparks.
I think they're just like us. It can't be any other way. But it is not known how they think, how they perceive life. Or maybe they all look like xenomorphs from the Alien movie. He lowered his voice. They're sitting in the bushes somewhere right now, waiting for the right moment.
Ginevra snickered.
Oh, come on.
Emilio was looking at the sky. You know, here's a star, look! He pointed with his finger. Don't you think she's acting strangely? Marco and the girl looked up at the sky. Indeed, a small star, the same as billions of others, began to pulsate, then rapidly swept over the horizon, pulsated and began to spin like a spiral, releasing light rays. The light was mesmerizing, addictive, even hypnotizing. In the utter silence, Emilio's voice, distant and slow, seemed like thunder. So much for the aliens. The star hovered over the horizon, as if many hundreds of kilometers away from the campfire of 3 tourists who decided to walk in the foothills. But it was getting closer, getting bigger and brighter. Emilio hugged his wife to him. Marco looked at them, then at the approaching light.
What is this? Let's get out of here?
Ginevra jumped up abruptly, Emilio too, despite his size. Marco ran back to the path and shouted,
Follow me, I know. There is a cave here. Let's hide there.
He took a small flashlight out of his pocket and began to illuminate the path with it, although there was no need for it. A glowing jellyfish-like object slowly creeping over the place where they stopped. It consisted of a spherical central part, inside of which a yellowish core pulsed like a yolk in an egg. It was the core that gave off light. Transparent, flexible tubular cords hung in great numbers from the edges of the hemisphere. They intertwined, rose and fell again. It seemed to be the living hair of a luminous hemisphere.
Let's run quickly.
Emilio wanted to turn and run, dragging his wife with him, but he couldn't do it. He stared at the firmament in fascination and saw 3 more stars approaching them, spinning in a spiral and spreading whitish, luminescent tentacles. He whispered, Let's run! Ginevra also replied in a whisper.
Yes. Rather.
Huge translucent jellyfish clustered above them, hovered and pulled thin tentacles towards their heads. Marco saw the bodies of Ginevra and Emilio hiding in cocoons of tentacles, disappearing as if they were dissolving. He retreated into the darkness behind the rock, watching, unable even to scream in fear. He was shaking and praying to all the saints to remain unnoticed. At the same time, he did not freeze. He was aware of his actions, and as soon as the tentacles reached out to him, he took off and ran along the path in the crevice between the rocks with a wild cry. He ran without stopping for a second. In just 15 minutes, he covered a 2-kilometer path up the slope. My heart was pounding. My throat and lungs were burning.
My God, what is it? Geneva.
Thoughts of the girl sobered him for a second, drove away the fear, but he returned a moment later with tripled strength. He didn't think about her anymore, and he didn't think about Emilio anymore. He did not understand what had happened. He did not understand what kind of creatures had descended to them from the night starry sky. I didn't understand, and I didn't want to understand. He craved only one thing, salvation and safety. Reason and the instinct of self-preservation dictated to him to get out of here as soon as possible. There was no question of going back, and Marco simply took a quick step forward between the rock piles. To be careful, he dimmed the light of the flashlight with his palm, but it was enough to highlight the path covered with small pebbles. Several times he slipped, fell, skinning his hands, but got up and left like an automaton. Ahead, the path ended in a sheer cliff. There was no further way. Marco was struck by fear. He was trapped, but fortunately the light of a flashlight illuminated a dark vertical gap. It was a cave, and maybe the cave had another exit behind the rock. It is necessary to go forward because going back is like death. Marco took a step forward. Emilio, absorbed by the light, stopped feeling his body. He He looked at the jellyfish-like creature, woven of light and something thick and enveloping, with detachment and fascination. No, it couldn't be said that he saw anything concrete. He felt it, just as he felt his wife. She was there, as if she was penetrating him, merging with him, with his thoughts, with his body. Images, lived years, memories flashed past my thoughts. Nothing tormented or tormented me anymore. All vain impressions faded into the 10th plane. Suddenly, the light began to fade, complete darkness fell. It was his death. Ginevra had a stronger character than Emidio, but she was also absorbed in the light. At the same time, she felt the tentacles entangling her, sluggishly tried to free herself, but as soon as she clung to one of the tentacle bundles and tried to pull it away from herself, the creature strongly squeezed her body, let go, and squeezed again. My breath caught in my throat, and the light hit my eyes even brighter.
Emidio. Amy.
Instead of screaming, she could only whisper, but even this small effort took away all her energy. Ginevra realized she was dying, but the thought didn't scare her. Some kind of force in her head, something reasonable and coming from the outside, guaranteed her peace. In a few minutes, it was all over. Emidio and Ginevra collapsed on the rocky crumbs at the foot of the mountains in 2 leathery bags, completely devoid of blood. They were 2 pale mummies with wide open whitish eyes. Emidio's big belly hung like a thin deflated balloon. Ginevra's beautiful and elastic breasts looked like 2 wrinkled cellophane bags. Her nipples were pointed and elongated. The cheekbones were covered with skin so that it seemed like it was about to burst. It was scary and disgusting. Both the man and the woman were naked. The light simply dissolved their clothes and then performed a terrible act with them, which was necessary for jellyfish-like creatures. Marco was walking through the cave. The smell of dampness hit my nose. Right in the center of the semicircular depression, a small muddy stream flowed along the bottom. It was impossible to drink this water, but I was terribly thirsty. Marco pressed his lips to the stream and decided to take one small sip, but immediately regretted it. The smallest limestone got into the throat with the water. The man choked and coughed. He walked forward and illuminated the path with a flashlight. The floor, walls and ceiling of the cave passage were round. It was as if a giant drill had pushed into the mountain from all over the acceleration, selected a rock and left a deep, rounded cavern tunnel. But it didn't matter to Marco. He wanted to go out into the light and then get to the nearest village, then get to Naples and rush to his native Paris. Forget everything to hell. He stopped and illuminated the walls of the cave with a flashlight. His heart was no longer pounding so often. Ginevra. So what? She has a husband, Emidio, and he was supposed to protect and save her. Is she beautiful? Beautiful, even very beautiful. But this does not mean anything. There are many beautiful girls in Rome, Paris, Berlin, Prague, Moscow. The life ahead is happy and interesting. And it's better to just forget about everything that happened. And what really happened? What was that? To whom and how to explain it? It's fantastic. No one will believe it. Emidio ran a beam of light along a rounded stone wall and was incredibly surprised when he saw a rock painting. He approached and took a closer look, whispering to himself,
Was it really painted by primitive people? Have they been here?
His mind and the knowledge that was in Marco's head told him that this was quite possible. Mountains, valleys and rivers under the mountains are a landscape quite suitable for the settlement of Cro-Magnons and other apes. They lived in this cave and painted on the walls. The images were slightly reddish and heavily faded, as if it were a tattoo driven right into the rock. It was a huge, elongated panel dotted with various small images forming a single picture. Gnarled little men were driving a huge buffalo, hitting it with spears. Among the little men who depicted the tribe living here towered oblong, elongated, short-legged and short-armed creatures. But it was all primitive. What really caused some shock was the image of a jellyfish-like creature hovering over a group of gnarled men. The creature spread its tentacles and pulled them towards the men, and the creature glowed. The light was depicted in wavy squiggles extending in different directions.
When did these creatures appear here?
There was a continuation next to it. The picture was covered with something black, eating away at the rock, but what Marco could see was amazing. There were no more people under the jellyfish-like creature, but there were 2 creatures themselves. One large and a second small one seemed to be ejected from its body. Then both creatures raced towards the sky, probably into space. Emetio walked along the wall looking at the rock carvings. What he saw was unique, grandiose, and mind-boggling. One could only wonder how all this had not been discovered earlier. Although maybe it was. The Dolomites are famous in UNESCO. For sure, this painting was studied and captured in photographs, but Marco himself, Ginevra, and her husband, Emidio, were not lucky enough to meet with jellyfish-like creatures. Marco stopped. An oblong structure was clearly outlined in the stone, equipped with serrated knives at the end. The structure bit into the mountain and rushed inside it. That's how this cave was formed. Marco took a step, stumbled, and felt himself falling into the abyss. Then there was only darkness and a quick death from a blow. Emidio and Ginevra did not see what was happening to the glowing jellyfish and what would happen next. The creature spread out in a circle and began to move slowly as if in a round dance. Their tentacles intertwined together, mutually reinforcing each other's light. There were at least a dozen of the creatures themselves. One of them was in the center. It grew, spread out, and gathered back into the dome. It's like a jellyfish on the waves of the ocean. Tentacles descended to the dead, withered bodies, caressed them, tugged at them, trembled. The creature itself began to swell, forming a clot at the top of the hemisphere. The light increased unbearably. Surely he would have been noticed if there were people 10 kilometers away. A couple more moments and a round lump, sparkling with bluish light, separated from the creature. He hovered in the air and remained motionless. The tentacles of the mother creature reached out to him, grabbed, and began to turn out a living bluish ball. At first, he recoiled from the tentacles, tried to soar upwards, but then obediently clung and waited for his fate. 10 minutes later, a small replica of them appeared among the huge jellyfish of light and energy. It was like their common cub, born from the light and the life force that had been taken from the bodies of Emidio and Ginevra. In low Earth orbit, at a distance of only 400 kilometers from the Earth's surface, an oblong spacecraft hovered. It was an alien shuttle, the systems and mechanisms of which were still beyond the control of the people of Earth. The ship froze in anticipation, spreading a transverse magnetic field for many hundreds of kilometers. He was waiting and had a definite purpose. Jellyfish-like creatures made of energy and light were curious and benevolent in their own way. Their nature was that they needed the energy of living, thinking human beings to reproduce. But the creatures themselves were not guilty of this. This was their nature. One of the light jellyfish got caught in a magnetic field and began to be attracted to the ship. It was silently bending, emitting huge prickly flashes. It was clear from her behavior that the creature was suffering. The ship opened the doors of the receiving terminals. The creature fell into the beam of the green spectrum and disappeared into it. It seemed to flow into the ship. It's incredible, but the civilization on the ship used the pure energy of the jellyfish-like creatures, fueling the power of their ship. Energy made it possible to obtain motion without repulsion in the vacuum of space, contrary to the laws of physics. It was obvious and self-evident for creatures to travel vast distances in the blink of an eye, and this ability did not go unnoticed by those who wanted to subordinate it to their goals. Light jellyfish gave energy to alien ships. Explanation from Incognito.
Evidence of light energy beings appears periodically. They were seen over the Siberian taiga, in the rocky spurs of China and Afghanistan, over Antarctica. We know that these creatures are part of the cosmic interplanetary fauna. They are alive and have intelligence. Their bodies are made of cosmic energy. Conventionally, we call it warp. We do not know exactly how the energy chaos is held in a hemispherical body. In addition, it is known that these creatures can have the shape of a pancake convex in the centers, an oblong oval or a ball. The name of these creatures is interspace for their ability to move in space and subspace. There is also a name in Latin, interspatium. With this creature, we begin your acquaintance with the cosmic energy fauna of living beings. Next, I present his image.